This is the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We chat about software development for mobile, HDTV, wearables, robotics, user experience, mentoring, and everything related to building products and services for the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. This is episode 7 of the Web Platform Podcast. Your hosts today are Christian Smith, open source developer and startup enthusiast, and myself, Erik Isaksen, UX engineer at 3Pillar Global. So today we have 3 guests from AgilityFeat, a design and development firm in the US, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and now in Honduras. AgilityFeat has been not only building out real-time web apps, but they've been doing it for a while now. They're also actively contributing to the community around it, as well by speaking at events. They're also they publish a weekly newsletter for realtime.com, and also they are authoring a book on real-time development with Web RTC. And there's a lot more that they do as well that they'll speak about. The first guest is Allan Naranjo. He is a web developer and leader in creating detailed mobile experiences. And those are with mostly heavy client-side frameworks, but he does work on the back end quite a bit. And Allan was the winner of the Access Innovation Prize in 2012 for one of his Facebook applications. Also today we have Mariana Lopez. She's the UX lead at AgilityFeat. She designs real-time applications for clients across a variety of industries. Mariana studied human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University. And she's also a professor of interaction design at Universidad Veritas in Costa Rica and Universidad de Costa Rica. Arin Sime is co-founder of AgilityFeat. He's our third guest today. And Arin has over 16 years of experience as a developer, entrepreneur, consultant, and trainer for everything from small startups to Fortune 100s and federal agencies. So today, let's talk about building and designing real-time applications and working with cutting-edge technologies like Web RTC, which is a real-time communication standard that is built on web technologies. So a lot of the browsers support this, and we'll talk about that, but there's not full support across all the browsers, and on mobile as well is a challenge, but there's also solutions for that as well. So Arin, can you tell us a bit about AgilityFeat and what you guys do?
So we do, we're a services firm, so we do contract software development for companies with a particular focus on things with a real-time data exchange or real-time communications aspect to them. Typically web applications based in Rails, Node.js, Python are kind of our core languages that we work in, though a lot of this is really ultimately JavaScript applications these days. In addition to that services work that we do, we also maintain a free newsletter, Realtime Weekly, which is kind of a roundup of the best content we find every week around real-time and technologies and content from around the web. It's a lot of fascinating stuff out there every week. So that's free, realtimeweekly.com, and then we have also started taking some of our experiences building a webinar app that we use sometimes in conferences as a demo of how Web RTC works, which is how we originally met, Erik. And we've taken the development that we did for that and turned it into a tutorial-driven book, and that's at realtimeweb.co.
So, Arin, in addition, you guys do a lot of thought leadership, and you speak a lot at conferences, and you're pretty active in the community. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, we've been speaking at a lot of groups over the first half of this year about Web RTC and what we've been learning in it. So we had an opportunity to speak at MoDev East, MoDev UX in Washington, D.C., some Node.js groups in New York, Atlanta, North Carolina, Virginia, so kind of around the place. And so we just think that a lot of stuff is, particularly Web RTC, I'm a little fascinated with right now, is opening up so much potential for the different types of applications and new experiences that we can create on the web, that we're kind of doing our little part of evangelizing that technology itself. We're not on the standards committee or anything like that. It's just something that we really like, and so want to do our part to push and be a part of building those applications.
So, Arin, now that you've mentioned Web RTC, and we talked a little briefly about it, can you talk to real-time communication, what it is, and what is Web RTC?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about to say you build real-time applications is a pretty broad category. There's more and more stuff that's being done on the web does have some sort of real-time component to it. Generally speaking, we're kind of talking about two different broad categories. The first is something that involves just kind of a real-time messaging or data exchange. So that could be things like data dashboards, or like your Uber sort of transportation applications that are sending real-time data back and forth between your mobile device and central servers and other users, that sort of thing. So that aspect is really all about the data between that. And there are a lot of different frameworks that you could use to implement something like that. And then the other thing, WebRTC, is more often applied to video and audio communications, although it does have a data channel to it as well. And WebRTC stands for Web Real-Time Communications. So when we say real-time communications, we're typically talking about more the video and audio type of communications through the browser over the web. So obviously there's a lot of chat applications and video conference applications that have existed for quite some time. What's happening now that's different is that WebRTC is an HTML5 standard that allows you to build peer-to-peer video and audio and data channels directly into the browser using relatively simple JavaScript calls. So it cuts out the need for any sort of intermediate server. It cuts out the need for any plugins or special downloads. It's basically baked right into the browser. So that accessibility to users, and it's not totally there yet, because we could talk more about it. It's not supported everywhere or in all situations yet, but it's headed in that direction. And so it's a great technology to learn more about now. And start building applications for, because over the next year or two, it's going to be more and more widespread than it already is now, and it just makes it creates all these new opportunities for interesting applications for us as developers to build.
In a recent issue of Realtime Weekly, you referenced an article that stated Google Hangouts in the Chrome browser is now going to totally run on WebRTC, which is awesome. So instead of a normal plugin like you would have in the other browsers. So it's interesting to me to see just how plugins, and not just plugins, but even native apps like Squiggle, which is a real-time conferencing application. They're now using WebRTC, I believe, inside of a Node WebKit wrapper, rather than using some native OS level tech or something else. So with that said, what do you think are the oppositions to using WebRTC?
Well, I don't think from the development community, really. I mean, there is some, there are certainly some political, shall we say, debates going on between companies about the best ways to implement this. It's still kind of an evolving standard right now. It's not finalized. There's still debates going on around video codecs to use, and the right way to implement it, and what browsers are going to support it and when. So there's that type of wrangling still going on in the community. But I think that what's nice about it over native APIs is that this is exposing it to a wider web development audience, and that's kind of what I increasingly feel like is the most exciting aspect of all this. That you don't have to be a telecom developer to build telecom applications anymore, essentially, right? And a lot of the people who are driving Web RTC or are on the standards committee are really interested in the low level and very important aspects of how the handshaking and the networking goes behind the scenes of Web RTC. But to me, the beauty of it is that as a web developer, I don't have to know that much about that. This is abstracting all of that for me. So just like services like companies like Twilio make it easier now to set up a phone number online and to use different APIs to text message and to build contact or customer support centers out of that. WebRTC is doing the same type of thing, and you can build applications without telecom knowledge that bridge the gap between telephones, cell phones, text messaging, video chat in the browser, and more. So that it abstracts all of that stuff away from us, and that to me is kind of the beauty of WebRTC.
Yeah, given its peer-to-peer nature, it seems like WebRTC is a good fit for communication across multi-platforms and devices, especially in the Internet of Things space. So, Allan, as far as peer-to-peer connections versus traditional techniques for real-time communication, is it more secure with WebRTC, less secure? Is it faster or slower, perceivably faster? So in your experience, what are the big differences that you found?
Well, yeah, one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you're doing peer-to-peer connections is that depending on what your application is doing, you may face challenges like speed of the connection of the users. So for instance, if my application, what does is share resources from peers, then you may face challenges like I have a high speed connection, and then the application will try to get the resources like we've seen in some implementations now where people are sharing resources like JavaScript resources. So instead of downloading them from the server, is getting those resources from other peers that are connected and that already have those resources downloaded. So if, let's say I'm connected in Virginia and Arin is in Virginia, and let's say I have a high-speed connection, and I try to get the resources from Arin, and Arin is not in a high-speed connection, what can happen is that the experience won't be that good. So those are the things that you have to take into consideration. What is it that you're doing when you're building this type of applications? Because in some cases, the smart thing will be just to get the resources from the server and get that hit in terms of bandwidth and all those things. But there are so many things that are being developed right now that will, of course, get those issues out of the way and make those implementations work in a great way.
So yeah, that brings up a great point, Allan. Bandwidth is a huge consideration that many of us take for granted. So connection speeds might not be a big deal if you're in Mountain View, California, or Fairfax, Virginia. But if you're in a very sparse rural area where the internet reach is not so great, it's very small, you might have an entirely different vantage point. Unfortunately, bandwidth is not always paramount priority when we develop products and services, and that can, in a lot of cases, lead to very bad user experiences. So it sounds like you're only as strong as your weakest link, or your weakest connection in this case with WebRTC and peer-to-peer in general. Would you say that?
Yeah. Another thing that I was concerned, and still I am a bit concerned about that, is security. So for instance, let's say the application tries to get resources from other user, and that resource has been the security. There's a security breach there, and those resources were compromised, and I'm getting those, and there might be some sort of evil JavaScript running into those resources that I'm getting. And even though the connection between those peers is encrypted by the API, those are the things that you have to take into consideration, because even though there are things like seal objects in ECMAScript 5 and stuff like that, it's still JavaScript, and people can do whatever they want with the client side of things. Yeah. And those things might be something that you want to have in mind when you are making your users share these type of resources.
One way I have heard about to handle secure data in the browser is to use a JavaScript crypto library. So Christian, I know recently you had added the Stanford crypto library, if I'm not mistaken, to your most recent project, the Anvil Connect ID server, which is an open source Node.js Connect ID server. Christian, what are the security risks when dealing with front-end JavaScript?
I think the lack of knowledge about these things is probably the biggest security risk involved. There's not enough people that understand how to use these tools on the front end. I'm not a crypto expert. I'm more of an end user of libraries like the standard JavaScript crypto library, and I'm looking forward to more tools like this, but I can't really comment on that.
Yeah, there are a few JavaScript crypto libraries out there. I've seen for front end, the Web Crypto library is a standard JS API that's being worked on. I saw it. It's it's moving pretty ahead on Chromium. I think Firefox is working on it as well. But I think we'll see a more emphasis on securing JavaScript once that's implemented across more browser vendors. So I could see a strong use case for transferring large data using peer-to-peer data channels in Web RTC, though. I just don't know how secure or safe it would be, or even I don't even know if it's absolutely necessary either.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about WebRTC is that everything is by default encrypted once you're in the peer connection. Gotcha. Yeah, the video, the audio, and the data are all encrypted as part of the WebRTC standard. I think the biggest security risk that you need to keep in mind with WebRTC is that WebRTC does not specify how you do the signaling, which is the handshaking before the call starts of connecting our two peers together. And in that's left up, and this is done intentionally, so that you have the flex. It's left up to the users how you implement signaling or handshaking. That's not part of the standard. And that's intentional because it's going to be a little different based on every application that you're building. But what you need to remember is that, that part is any security you need around that, you have to create yourself, right? So you want to make sure, for example, that if you're building a healthcare related application using WebRTC, that you're not passing patient identifying information in that handshake, and you're not using anything with, like their social security numbers or some sort of identifying information in that handshake. It needs to all be encrypted and anonymized somehow in there. And but if you handle that part properly, then WebRTC has interesting applications for people concerned about security because it is peer-to-peer, so that if you're taking advantage of that, it means that there's not any server in the middle intercepting the calls, and that removes a security risk of a man in the middle type of attack, and so that makes it attractive to people. There's definitely some interest in using it in communication and healthcare applications because of that. It could help with HIPAA compliance and stuff like that. I think it also opens up some other interesting applications. One of the many video chat type tools that have been built for Web RTC. It was built, I think, by an Italian guy, and this site is secretlymeet.me. And I think that one's cool because I'm not sure, from an architectural perspective, I'm not sure how different it is than any other Web RTC video chat tool out there. But they're really highlighting that this is, they say this is a line for your private encounters, whatever that means to you. But they're really emphasizing the fact that these are calls that should be extremely private and hard to intercept. And I think, in today's internet, with concerns about NSA and privacy, both from corporations and from government, it's interesting to consider that you could build some applications based on WebRTC that help give people a little extra assurance of privacy.
So once you manually secure the handshake, as I understand it, it sounds like WebRTC is already secure by default, actually.
Once you're in the conversation, it should be. That's right. And there are privacy concerns built in for users as well, in the sense that the browser is required to ask you for your permission before it turns on your video and audio to the other users. So that makes it a little harder for me to start a WebRTC session with you without you realizing it. So there's some things like that also give a little extra assurance around it. But these are ultimately, all of these things are things that you have to design for, and that interaction and experience around that is where Mariana brings a perspective that I think is still just evolving in the real-time space. People are still fascinated with the technology, but not everyone is thinking about the customer experience with it yet.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Arin. I can definitely see where user experience considerations in designing for real-time are so key to the success of the product. I had the pleasure, actually, of seeing Mariana speak at Modev UX in May on designing for the fourth dimension. I think that was the name of it. But I have to say that there was so much more to consider. There is so much more to consider when designing for user interactions in real time. So Mariana's takeaways from that talk were really, really great, and they really hit home. Mariana, could you please elaborate on what goes into designing the experience for real time?
Sure. And these findings are not the rule solve it all. They've just been things that we've encountered and that I think are important to get out there and to let people know so that they can think about this when they're designing for real-time applications. And the first one, the most important one, is we've been talking about how great Web RTC and RTC technologies are, and I fully support that. But I always think that an important rule to keep in mind is don't let the technology become more important than the experience. You have to think, is this the right tool? Will I be helping them? Will my users have the correct bandwidth? All that is very important when you're thinking about incorporating RTC or not. The second one is feedback is always very important. That's a golden rule of UX, is feedback. I include it because sometimes you forget that feedback in real-time applications is also about what other people are doing if you're building collaborative applications, or what's going on in the world around you if you have a logistics or a sensing application, and that becomes as important as giving feedback to user interactions. The third one that I like talking about, and I've changed it a little bit, is about information hierarchy, selecting when and how to show information. So not only visually, but also, are you going to use sound? How are you going to let people know that they're sharing their cameras, that their audio is coming through, that new information is available without distracting their workflow and without being intrusive? That is going to be very important. And the next finding is very related with this, is how to handle changes in a fast changing environment. So when you're talking about real-time applications, you could have a lot of data coming in, and you have to structure it, and you have to let users know that there's something important that they need to look at. But there has to be a decision from the system on how to present that and how to do that. It's not always just throw the information at the user and let them decide. That could get very overwhelming when you're talking about real-time data. And then finally, it's very important that you think about graceful degradation or in progressive enhancement. When you think about Web RTC, it's still a brand new technology, like we've been talking, and some browsers don't yet support it. Sometimes there's network issues, and you have to rely on the fact that sometimes the data won't come through, the user won't be able to establish the connection, and you don't want your experience to be horrible if that happens. So that's just a summarized version of things that you need to think about when designing for real-time applications.
So when dealing with graceful degradation, how do you handle browsers not supporting Web RTC, like Mobile Safari, the Android browser, Internet Explorer? How do you handle consistency at the UX level? And do you just throw up an HTML page that says, "Oh, you need to upgrade to something else," or to handle that, or how does that work exactly?
So we have it really depends on the experience and the context. Some applications don't work if you're in different browsers. For example, in our conferencing application, you can still see the slides. We still use another technology to change the information on the screen to use chat, but the conferencer will know if they can video call you or not, depending on the browser that you're using. So for people that are using browsers that are not supported, like IE or mobile Safari or things like that, they can still get some of the experience, but we give the users enough information so that they don't try to start a call with somebody that can't really use Web RTC. We use other messaging applications so that we don't depend entirely on peer-to-peer connections if they can't be established. And basically we do a little bit of mixing and matching of technology so that you can still get a good experience if you're in a browser that doesn't support Web RTC, but you get a better experience if you're in a browser that does.
So in that case, you still have communication method for those users that can utilize something, but maybe not video or something that's like that. It's something else, in other words.
Right. It depends, but yeah, that's the clearest example. Our conferencing application, you'll still be able to see the slides go through. You're still going to be able to see the chat and the comments that people make, but you won't, for example, be able to be called on a video call.
Yeah, I was going to add something to that, and Mariana makes a great point of the users should still have some experience of your platform, even though they won't be able to start calls and stuff like that, but you still deliver some content to them. But another thing that comes to my mind right now is one example of real-time information that I made last year with some friends was a real-time Bull Nap for the Costa Rican presidential elections. And some people go crazy when you see, and I'm talking about developers, sometimes we see this technology and we think of all sorts of implementations we can make. And sometimes real-time is not the right tool for this, because information changes too fast. And for instance, let's say, and this comes in very, very tight with UX. Let's say you were talking about a voting app, and information is changing very, very fast, and you have 15,000, 20,000, and even more people voting at the same time. You have to make sure that UX and the developers are very, very aware of this situation, because otherwise you can be changing graphics and stuff like that that will make your app just unusable. So Mariana is right. You have to make sure that you understand what is it that you're doing in terms of deliver the best UX to the customers, because sometimes we think that we're doing a great job as a developer just because we're sending information and we're displaying that in real time. But sometimes real time is not, it shouldn't be as real time as it is. And I don't know if I'm being clear on this. Sometimes real time is way too fast.
And a little bit, to elaborate a little bit more on your point of what happens when a user doesn't have the right technologies or the right bandwidths. I'm all for different levels of experience, and hopefully the last resort is putting up a web page that says, hey, you can't access this because you don't have the right technology. Yeah. But it has happened, you get to that point. And it is, like Allan said, all about making the right decisions for the experience. If your target users are mostly using Internet Explorer, then you really have to think about building a tool that's right for them instead of trying to use the most cutting edge technology, which won't help your users. So there's always a balance between that.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that we have all this vast amount of data. There's so many users concurrently maybe on the applications. And it's easy for us as developers to get really wrapped up in the technology piece of it all and forget about the experience or put it as a lower priority. Not that I've done that myself, of course, but...
Yeah, but I remember one of my professors in college used to say, like, you're going to know so much of objects and coding and stuff like that, and you're going to start seeing software everywhere, but your customer will only need a spreadsheet. So you have to be very careful of just start creating software when people are just needing just a text file. So you have to understand, like Mariana says, who your target is, what devices are they're using, and if what you're building is the right tool for them, because sometimes it may not be, sometimes it might, and that's the challenge, to understand, and that's the key of every business, to understand who your target is and making sure that you're creating the right tool for them, because sometimes you might be creating a piece of software that is great, but it won't match your target, so you're wasting your time.
Yeah, definitely. It's always good to step back and look at what the problems really are. Is what I'm doing right now helping deliver a better experience for the end user? So essentially a reality check on why we are using the technology, and at a more higher level, I guess, why are we doing this?
Right, and that being said, there's still, I think, a lot of problems that can be solved with Web RTC and with real-time communications, and we're pushing the boundaries of what can be done and how it can be done, and it's just about getting the right experience. But there's so much that can still be done with Web RTC, and the applications that have come out, some of them are pretty impressive and have solved a few interesting problems. So I always like to be cautious and say, don't let the technology get the best of the experience, but also there's a lot of things that you can do with Web RTC and that will really push the boundaries and make users' lives easier, which that's always a great thing.
Yeah, the technologies will change, but the experience will still need to be consistent. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. It's always about the experience. As long as you keep that in mind, then some technologies can really enhance it.
So on the topic of real-time experience, Christian and I were both in a hackathon in February for building static applications. It was called the Static Showdown. And we talked about this in a prior episode. We use Firebase as our backend and AngularJS as the app portion of it. So one of the great things that we found with using Angular and Firebase together was for multiple users concurrently, you could have these three-way bindings so that everyone gets these updates instantaneously in real-ish time. So we wanted something like that for what we were building. And one thing I did notice about Firebase 2 after the fact was that it managed data sync offline pretty well. So it's not a total offline solution, but it was helpful in the event of networks dropping or poor connections. So can you talk about how AgilityFeat has handled offline usage and data sync for real time at both the UX and development levels?
Depending on what is it that you're trying to accomplish. But for instance, one application that I developed a couple months ago was, let's say, just to not mention some names here. It was an application to allow people to tag their friends in Facebook. So it was a Facebook application in a web application. So sometimes you need to, of course, use all the tools that you have for web apps, and I mean app catch and storing. So, for instance, we use offline catching just to allow people to have a better experience, just not to get the same resources all the time. So, for instance, in this application I'm talking about, if you wanted to tag your friends and you got that information from Facebook, you don't want to make that request twice. So we stored that in local storage, and the same thing with the resources. So this makes a good example of how you can improve the quality of the applications and make a better experience for your users. So instead of getting all the data all the time, just catch using manifests and stuff like that, using local storage. So if your user is using their phone or their mobile device, whatever that is, a tablet or a phone, you can still do stuff if you're offline. So it is important that you work with the UX team to make sure that you let the user know, hey, look, you're offline, but you can still do some of this stuff, and then detect the offline-online status of the device, and then do whatever it is that you have to do when it is correct, the correct implementation, because sometimes it just doesn't make any sense, or the resources are not good anymore for whatever reason. So it is important that you understand what is it that you're doing offline, and make sure that the UX team helps you to build that experience so your user knows that they're offline, but they can still do stuff, and then let them know that an action was taking place once they went offline.
As an example, one of our clients is a logistics transportation company, and we've got a what we could loosely call a data dashboard, real-time data dashboard for them, that they do need to be able to drive down into reports and stuff and sort of resort and view the data in different ways. And we don't want them to make trips back to the server for all of that. So the data is loaded in memory, but it still has to be able to handle the scenario where new data has come in and that data set needs to be refreshed. So that, Mariana had to balance that in the UI.
Yeah, and some of the most important considerations that we found there was we needed to give the user constant feedback if they were connected or not, because even though the data is still available, if you go offline, you have to know that it's not it's not pushing in new data. And one of the things that we've learned and we're working with now is we need a way to have a notification system that is decoupled from the UI, and that it keeps running even though you're offline. Because of the sensitive information of the data, we've been thinking about other ways to notify the user even though they're not using the browser or they've logged out of the application. And also some of the challenges that we had was what happens after a while if I come back to the application and I was online. How do I handle the amount of information that I haven't been getting? So the application that we designed or that I helped design was always assumed that you were getting a constant stream of data, and so it refreshed the information that was on screen. But sometimes when the users go offline and they come back online, they have a huge amount of information that has changed and that we haven't been refreshing. So those are some of the challenges that we're experiencing right now with this application that Arin was talking about.
I can certainly appreciate the work you guys are doing, especially now that I'm using mobile more and more to consume information from the web. I also seem to be using my MacBook almost totally for work and content creation also. So I'm not usually consuming information on there. I have felt the frustration of slower connection speeds as well. Images and data on web pages that I view on my phone, they cause some usability and performance problems. But not only that, the data usage can get very costly. So users shouldn't have to think about these things, in my humble opinion. So building an application cannot be based solely on best case scenario or single case scenarios anymore. So let's say that I'm building an app for a critical medical transportation service, and this has to be in real time. I can't just build the app thinking that it's okay if our users lose connection. It's that mindset that, oh, that's just a small percentage of our users that really, makes that fail. So the thought that people might not get their supplies in time in this case is just not acceptable because lives are depending on this app working. So it's an extreme example, but the sad truth is that if you lose your connection, 90% of your apps just don't work, period.
Yeah.
It's the simple things that you guys are doing, like showing some indicators to offline users to communicate with them and let them know that they are offline, but the features are still able to be used. And oh, by the way, as soon as a connection does come up, you'll be reconnected and we'll be able to redo all the things that you have on here to enable them and to sync up data. I mean, that's pretty brilliant. So, I mean, I think it's great. And hats off to AgilityFeat for that, for doing the right thing by the users. So,
woohoo! Yeah, and I wanted to come back to a point that you made earlier too about the graceful degradation, Erik. Is particularly important with, and you were saying, not everywhere has the same strength internet connection that we are used to in Mountain View or Fairfax, as you said, and it's particularly with the video communications. That's something also that we're learning is how to handle that and present that to the user. So I'll give you one very specific example. A project that we're working on right now. It's a product that we're building. Is a tool for doing online remote usability research with users on your website right now. And this is kind of a product that's in development now, but we're actually getting pretty close to an alpha stage. And I mention here in part because if anybody listening to this wants to be a beta customer in it, and help us test it out, they can definitely contact us. We're looking and talking with people right now about starting to test it for us. And the basic idea there is, you've got a visitor on your website and you want to do a usability research study with them online. You're going to have some video chat with them built into it. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to create a situation where someone is a customer or potential customer on your website, and by asking them to participate in the study, you actually annoy them because it's a bad experience, right? That would be a really bad usability study if you turned away users because of bad usability. So the biggest risk with that is trying to invite someone to a conversation and then not having the strength of internet connectivity for them to support it. So in the dashboard that we built for this, where basically you're seeing visitors to your site and have the option of inviting them to conversations, a really key part of that is seeing an estimate of what their connection strength is and a recommendation based on that of whether you should try to have a conversation with that person or not. So essentially you're going to select the users who have the best connections, which arguably in a usability study could bias your user pool some, but is in this case so important that it's going to be a positive experience for them and for you, that it's worth it.
As far as resources for Web RTC and real-time development, I've used webrtc.org. There's also a great WebRTC Google community on Google+. Obviously, I am subscribed to your weekly newsletter, Realtime Weekly. Is WebRTCReadyYet.com is a great tool to find out the current browser status, and lots of great stuff on GitHub for wrappers and polyfills. Also, if you go on GitHub and you just type in WebRTC, there's some really cool stuff. So are there any other resources or additional takeaways from your real-time experiences?
Sure. Yeah, there's a few other really good sites that we don't have any connection to that I want to mention as well that are worth people looking into. The sort of gold standard of how to get started with WebRTC is a tutorial on HTML5 rocks, and they have a lot of great tutorials on that site in general. There's also learnfromlisa.com, Lisa Larson Kelly, who's got an online course on WebRTC, which is great. There's a site called bloggeek.me, which is one of the leading, probably most prolific blogger around WebRTC. Sahi Levi is his name, and it's a great site to follow as well. And then for some really technical and interesting posts is another site to check out is webrtchacks.com. And for instance, one of the really interesting ones that they did I think a few months back now was analyzing how to try and verify that Amazon's Mayday service uses WebRTC under the covers. That's never been publicly confirmed, but was widely assumed. And they did a network traffic analysis that basically showed it's at least using parts of WebRTC that they've kind of pulled together and perhaps implemented themselves. So they do some really interesting technical posts like that as well.
In your newsletter, I did see an article mentioning Amazon's Fire Phone as well.
Yeah, Amazon's Fire Phone. I think Amazon is, Google's really the one of the biggest proponents behind WebRTC, and a lot of the initial presentations and tutorials have also come from Google-related people. But I think Amazon is certainly interesting to watch because you could make the case that although I haven't really seen Amazon promoting or pushing WebRTC itself, that they may be actually the biggest proponents of it in terms of getting the most people using it because of the Mayday service on the Kindle is exposing people to using WebRTC in a very wide audience and also in a mobile first situation. And then also with the new Fire phone that's been announced, that is, also uses Mayday and a lot of video technology in it. So I think it's really interesting to watch as companies start to adopt either WebRTC directly or something, similar to it or some custom implementation of it. It's kind of an indicator of where things are headed and why this is such an exciting space to follow right now.
Yeah, it's interesting that Mayday was built using pieces of WebRTC and other web technologies. I wrote a 3-part blog series in December on online concierge services, and I went through Microsoft and Apple, and I found that Apple's online experience surprisingly was really bad. I mean, it took several steps, like over a dozen steps, to get to a chat window even to talk to somebody. So it was really crazy to me. the lack of concierge service on there. But I was really impressed with Mayday and what they considered as far as the user experience. The one-way video is a great example of that, where they can't see what you're doing or where you are. So that's great for security reasons. I wouldn't want anybody to see, where things are located in my house, people I don't know or anything like that. So that's pretty cool. And the amount of taps to get to Mayday, or even voice commands as well, that's got to be much better. The downside is it's only on the Kindle, so, and a specific Kindle at that. But very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those sorts of things are where we're getting now. People are getting a little bit over the initial technical excitement of what can be done with real-time technologies and with Web RTC. And so I think an interesting thing for us as developers and designers is to start thinking more around that experience. And I think there's also some which I wrote about on Medium, on a post on Medium recently, about kind of the ethical concerns or ways as developers we can make sure that we're building experiences that users know what we're doing and know when their camera's turned on and that sort of thing. And that experience is really important, and Mayday does a great job of it.
I know I mentioned iswebrtcreadyyet.com before, but also the company that maintains it, and Yet, which is ampersand Yet, they also have some awesome open source tools for using WebRTC with Node.js applications and services. So check them out on GitHub when you get a chance. Is there anything that we missed that we need to talk about on real-time applications?
I think one thing that is just worth emphasizing, we haven't talked about as much, is that there's, we hinted at it but didn't really give examples, is that there's so much that you can do with WebRTC that is not related to video chat. And people are starting to realize that. So Allan wrote a blog post on our site on AgilityFeat.com recently about using the web audio API, and that's based on some work that we're doing for a client for a music application that's based on WebRTC. And then there are also these other interesting examples out there that I think Allan described earlier, like Pure CDN that was purchased by Yahoo last year for file and asset sharing through the data channel of WebRTC, or using that data channel of WebRTC for exchanging information between gamers in online, multiplayer games, that sort of thing. So there's, although a lot of the attention is often based around applications that have a video chat style component to them, there's so much more that you can do with it than that.
Yeah, I think it turns people off when they see a blog post or a screencast on WebRTC video, because everyone seems to be focused on that one aspect of WebRTC, like, oh, you're going to have, like Google Hangouts, but with web technology. But the data channels are very exciting to me. My mind immediately goes to peer-to-peer sales, like transferring receipts and payment information across connection. But the gaming cases you brought up, that's really exciting too. So that's some really cool stuff that you guys are working on. I'll have to check it out and check those blog posts out right away.
Yeah, we're excited, and we'd love to hear from others too, listening to this, about what sort of applications they might be doing. We're happy to feature them in Realtime Weekly or any blog posts that they write around this. We're always looking for more great content on that to share with our readers. So.
Yeah, and by the way, the winner of that hackathon Christian and I were on in February, yeah, that winner was using WebRTC.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So if people want to find out more about you and talk more about WebRTC with you guys, about designing for real-time apps to hire you guys, or just chat in general, where can our listeners find you?
AgilityFeat.com is our main company site, AgilityFeat.com, or you can find us at realtimeweekly.com or realtimeweb.co. And I'm Arin Sime on Twitter, ARINSIME.
And Mariana and Allan?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as well, and my Twitter handle is NanaLQ, NANALQ.
Yeah, and mine is Orange Software.
Also, Mariana, You'll be teaching a graduate program class in September at the Universidad Veritas in Costa Rica. I know it's not a public class, but can you tell our Veritas student listeners out there, if there are any, what that's going to be on?
Evaluating user interactions and user interfaces.
So is there anything you guys would like to promote related or unrelated to Web RTC?
No, I think we covered it already in the other sites. So this has been a lot of fun. We really enjoyed speaking with you all, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. So thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
This episode comes to you, at least in part, through the support and sound equipment generously supplied by 3 Pillar Global. 3 Pillar is a software product development company in Fairfax, Virginia, and 3 Pillar is a leader in creating purposeful and innovative product experiences. 3 Pillar is recently named to the Washington Post Top Workplaces list for 2014. So if you want to follow 3 Pillar on the Twitters, it's at 3 Pillar Global. And to find out more and see current job openings, please visit 3pillarglobal.com. That's 3, the number, pillarglobal.com. Thank you.